I still remember the exact moment my daughter-in-law leaned close enough for only me to hear her. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday dinner, the kind we'd had dozens of times before. Roast chicken in the oven, mashed potatoes steaming on the table, the old oak dining set my late husband Daniel bought nearly 30 years ago. Everyone was talking at once the way families do when they believe things are simple. My son Ethan was laughing about something from work. Claire was smiling politely, passing the green beans across the table. And I remember thinking, just for a moment, that maybe our family had finally settled into something peaceful. Then Claire stood up from her chair and walked around the table. Slowly, quietly. She stopped beside me and bent down like she was about to ask if I needed more gravy. Instead, she whispered into my ear, so softly that even Ethan couldn't hear it. "I'm pregnant," she said. I turned my head toward her, surprised but ready to smile. A grandchild. That should have been a joyful thing. But she didn't step away. She stayed there, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath against my cheek. Then she added the rest. "And the father is someone from this family. One who understands the most." Claire must have thought she had shocked me. Maybe she believed that whisper would make me panic or demand answers right there in front of everyone. But I didn't ask a single question. Instead, I looked at her the way a person studies a puzzle. Because something about her words didn't feel like a confession. It felt like a move. A deliberate one. And the strangest part was the way she said it. Not with fear. Not with shame. But with confidence. As if she believed this secret gave her power over me. I buttered a piece of bread and placed it on my plate. My hands were steady. My voice, when I finally spoke again to the table, sounded perfectly normal. "Ethan," I said gently, "pass me the salt, please." Claire watched me the entire time, waiting for a crack, waiting for some sign that her little whisper had shaken me. But the truth was something she didn't understand yet. That dinner might have been the moment she thought she started the game. But for me, it was the moment I realized exactly what kind of game she was trying to play. Wrapped the leftover chicken in foil. Claire stood beside the counter drying the dishes. The kitchen light above us hummed softly. For a moment we were alone. She leaned closer again, the same calm smile still resting on her face. "You have been very quiet," she said gently. Her voice sounded pleasant enough that anyone listening would think she was simply making conversation. I folded the foil carefully around the dish and placed it in the refrigerator before answering. "I have always believed it is better to listen before speaking," I said. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to decide whether I was confused or pretending. Then she dried her hands and set the towel down. "I thought you might have questions," she said. I turned to face her fully then. She was younger than me by nearly 4 decades. But in that moment, she looked oddly certain of herself. Confident in a way that felt rehearsed. As I stood there for a moment in the dim hallway, I realized one thing very clearly. Claire believed she had placed me in a difficult position. What she did not realize was that she had also given me something else. Time. And time, if used carefully, can reveal far more truth than any whisper ever could. I woke early the next morning, earlier than usual, before the sun had fully climbed above the line of maple trees behind my house. The kitchen was quiet in the soft gray light that comes just before a clear day begins. I brewed my coffee the same way I always did, 2 scoops of grounds into the machine Daniel and I bought years ago, and I stood at the counter while the familiar smell filled the room. Normally that first cup of coffee is when my thoughts wander. But that morning my mind was very focused. Claire's voice kept replaying in my memory, calm and steady, the way she leaned close enough that only I could hear her. "I am pregnant. The father is someone from this family." She had chosen those words carefully. Not emotional, not uncertain, careful. I carried my coffee to the small table by the window and sat down where I could see the backyard. The grass was still wet with morning dew, shining softly under the rising sun. For many years this house had been the center of our family. Birthday dinners, holidays, summer evenings when Ethan was young and his friends filled the yard with noise. Daniel used to say a house remembers everything that happens inside it. As time moved forward, small things began to change. At first they were easy to ignore. Questions that sounded casual. Comments that lingered a little too long. One afternoon about a year ago, she sat across from me at this same kitchen table while we were drinking iced tea. She asked how Daniel organized the family finances before he passed away. I told her the truth, that Daniel believed in keeping things simple and transparent. She nodded thoughtfully, as if memorizing the answer. Another time she asked about the property records for the house and the small lake cabin Daniel's parents left to him. She framed it as curiosity, the kind of thing a new member of the family might naturally want to understand. At the time, I appreciated her interest. Looking back now, those conversations felt different. More focused than I realized. More intentional. I took another sip of coffee and watched a pair of birds land on the fence at the edge of the yard. Claire believed she had introduced a mystery into my life with that whisper. But mysteries do not remain mysteries forever. They begin to unravel the moment someone starts asking the right questions. And as I sat quietly in that morning light, I realized something else that Claire had not considered when she leaned down beside my chair the night before. She thought she was the only person planning her next move. She was wrong. I spent the rest of that morning moving through the house slowly, letting the quiet settle around me while my thoughts continued to arrange themselves. Morning, I decided to take a short drive into town. The grocery store was only 8 miles away, just past the old bridge and the row of small shops that had been there longer than Ethan had been alive. I did not actually need anything from the store, but I wanted the time to think without the quiet walls of the house pressing too closely around me. The drive gave me space. As I passed the lake road, I remembered another conversation with Claire that had seemed harmless at the time. It was last autumn, shortly after Ethan and Claire had visited the small cabin Daniel's parents left to him years ago. Claire walked along the shoreline that afternoon, asking questions about the history of the property. She seemed fascinated by the idea that the cabin had stayed in the family for 3 generations. I told her the truth, that Daniel always believed certain things should remain protected within the family no matter what happened. Claire listened carefully. Too carefully, perhaps. At the time, I assumed she admired the tradition. Now, sitting behind the steering wheel as the road curved gently toward town, I realized how closely she had studied those details. When I reached the grocery store parking lot, I remained in the car for a moment longer before stepping out. People moved in and out of the entrance carrying paper bags and pushing shopping carts, completely unaware of the strange puzzle turning quietly in my mind. I walked through the aisles slowly, picking up a few ordinary things that I could easily have bought another day. Bread, milk, a small bag of apples. My hands moved automatically while my thoughts continued to circle around the same question. Why had Claire chosen to tell me that secret in a whisper, away from Ethan and away from everyone else? If she truly believed she was sharing joyful news, she would have said it proudly at the table. But she did not. She chose privacy. She chose ambiguity. She chose a sentence that raised more questions than answers. That meant something. And the more I thought about it, the clearer one possibility became. Claire was not simply sharing information. She was testing something. Testing me. Testing how much I understood about the family she had married into. When I returned home that afternoon, I placed the groceries on the counter and looked around the quiet house once again. Nothing had changed since the morning. But inside my mind, something had. Because the longer I considered Claire's words, the more certain I became of one thing. Whatever game she believed she had started, she had not yet realized that the rules of our family were older than she understood. And very soon, she was going to discover that. I spent the next 2 days doing something Claire would never have expected. I said nothing. Not to Ethan. Not to anyone else in the family. Life continued in the quiet rhythm it had always followed. I watered the plants on the back porch, folded the laundry, and took my usual walk around the neighborhood in the late afternoon when the sun softened and the sidewalks filled with the familiar sounds of children riding bicycles. To anyone watching from the outside, nothing had changed. But inside my mind, the pieces were moving slowly into place. One detail kept returning to me again and again. The confidence in Claire's voice when she whispered those words. She did not sound frightened. She did not sound ashamed. She sounded certain that what she had told me would matter. That meant she believed the information gave her leverage. And leverage only works when someone believes they understand the rules of the situation better than everyone else. Late Wednesday afternoon, Ethan called me while I was in the garden pulling weeds near the fence line. His voice sounded cheerful, the same warm tone he had always used when checking in on me. Claire and I might stop by this weekend, he said. She has been feeling a little tired lately. I wiped the dirt from my hands onto a small towel and leaned against the porch railing while we talked. That is perfectly fine, I told him. The house is always open. He thanked me the way he always did, with that quiet kindness Daniel used to admire in him. After the call ended, I stood there for a moment looking out across the yard. The maple tree leaves rustled gently in the breeze. Everything looked peaceful. Yet the more I considered Claire's behavior, the more I began to see a pattern forming beneath it. Claire had never been careless with her words. Even in casual conversation, she chose them carefully, the way a person arranges pieces on a board before beginning a game. The whisper at dinner had been no different. She had not said the father was Ethan. She had not given a name at all. She left the sentence hanging in the air, unfinished but heavy with implication. Someone from this family. That phrase was not an accident. It was meant to create confusion, suspicion, perhaps even fear. But the more I examined it, the clearer something became. Claire believed that statement would trap me into silence. Because if I reacted strongly, I would risk exposing a family secret she assumed I was trying to protect. The idea almost made me smile. Claire had studied the surface of our family history, but she had never truly understood it. She had asked questions about Daniel's estate, about the cabin, about the way property passed through generations. But there was one detail she had never asked about. One piece of the story she had somehow missed entirely. That evening, I walked into Daniel's old study, the room I had left mostly untouched since he passed away. The shelves were still lined with the same rows of files and documents he kept so carefully organized. I opened the lower drawer of his desk and pulled out a thin folder I had not looked at in years. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with time, but the words were still perfectly clear. I sat quietly in Daniel's old chair and read the document once more. When I finished, I closed the folder and rested my hand on the desk for a moment. Claire believed she had discovered something powerful about our family. But the truth was something very different. Because if she truly thought the future she was hinting at would give her control over the Whitmore name, she had made one very serious mistake. She had not asked the right question. I did not sleep much that night after sitting in Daniel's old study. The house had grown quiet long before midnight, but I remained at the desk with the small folder resting in front of me. It had been years since I last opened it. Yet the memory of the conversation Daniel and I had when we first signed those documents was still clear in my mind. Daniel believed in planning ahead. He used to say that families stayed strong when the important decisions were made calmly, long before they were ever needed. At the time, I thought he was simply being careful, the way he always was with business matters and family property. Now I realized that his caution had given me something valuable. Time. The following morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping lightly against the kitchen windows. A slow, steady rain that made the whole house feel quieter than usual. I poured a cup of coffee and stood by the sink watching the gray sky settle over the neighborhood. Claire and Ethan were planning to visit on Saturday, which meant I had 2 more days before seeing them again. 2 days was more than enough. I returned to Daniel's study and opened the folder once more, reading each page carefully as if I were seeing it for the first time. The document was simple, written in clear language that left very little room for confusion. Daniel had insisted on that. I remembered how he sat across from the lawyer all those years ago, asking precise questions about every detail. Not because he expected trouble, but because he believed clarity prevented misunderstandings later. Claire had spent the past few years asking about the family property, about the lake cabin, about how the Whitmore name passed from one generation to the next. She believed she understood the system. She believed she could step neatly into it if she positioned herself correctly. But there was one rule she had never discovered. One condition Daniel placed quietly into the structure of the estate long before Claire ever appeared in our lives. I closed the folder again and rested my hands on the desk. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, drumming softly against the roof. It occurred to me that Claire probably imagined she was guiding events toward a moment when she could reveal something dramatic to the rest of the family. Perhaps she expected panic or confusion. Perhaps she believed that once her story was told, no one would question her version of events. That confidence was her greatest mistake, because the truth was not something she could bend simply by whispering half of a sentence at the dinner table. The truth was written down years earlier in documents she had never bothered to examine. Later that afternoon, I made a phone call I had not needed to make in a long time. The same attorney Daniel trusted still worked in the small brick office downtown, just 3 blocks from the courthouse. When his assistant answered, she recognized my name immediately. Some families leave long footprints in a town like ours. I asked for a brief appointment the following morning. Nothing urgent, I told her. Just a few documents I wanted to review in person. After I hung up the phone, I felt an unusual calm settle over me. Claire believed she had introduced uncertainty into my life. But uncertainty disappears quickly once the facts are placed side by side. And by the time Saturday arrived, I intended to make sure every fact was exactly where it needed to be. I arrived at the attorney's office early the next morning, just after the courthouse clock struck 9. The rain from the night before had passed, leaving the streets damp and shining under the pale morning sun. The brick building looked exactly the same as it had for decades, steady and unchanging like most things in a small American town. Daniel used to say he trusted places that did not feel the need to reinvent themselves every 5 years. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile and led me down the same narrow hallway I remembered from years earlier. When Mr. Harrison stepped into the room a few moments later, he looked older, of course, but still carried the calm manner that had made Daniel respect him so much. We shook hands and sat across from each other at the small conference table. I placed the folder gently in front of him. I wanted to review these documents again, I said. He opened the folder and adjusted his glasses, reading through the pages carefully. The room remained quiet except for the soft turning of paper. After a few minutes he looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. It has been a long time since we prepared these, he said. I nodded. But the terms are still exactly the same? I asked. He leaned back slightly in his chair. Yes, he replied calmly. Nothing has changed. The conditions Daniel requested are still fully valid. Hearing that confirmation brought a quiet sense of clarity to my mind. Claire believed she understood how the Whitmore estate worked. She believed the name, the property, and everything connected to it could be influenced by the right story told at the right moment. But Daniel had never built our family's future on stories. He built it on documents. Mr. Harrison closed the folder and folded his hands together on the table. Is there a reason you wanted to revisit this now? He asked gently. I considered the question for a moment before answering. Let us just say that someone may soon misunderstand the rules, I said. He studied my face briefly, then gave a small nod as if he understood more than I had actually said aloud. Small towns have a way of teaching people when not to ask too many questions. When I left the office, the air outside felt fresh and cool. I walked slowly down the sidewalk toward my car, watching a group of high school students cross the street laughing about something I could not hear. Life continued in its usual rhythm all around me, completely unaware of the quiet plan forming beneath it. Saturday would arrive soon. Claire and Ethan would walk through the front door of my house, just as they had many times before. Claire would carry that same calm confidence she showed at the dinner table, certain that she held a secret powerful enough to shift the balance of our family. I unlocked my car and paused for a moment before getting inside. The truth was already prepared. It had been prepared years earlier, long before Claire ever joined our family. All I needed to do now was wait until she decided it was time to reveal her story, because when that moment came, I would be ready to reveal something she had never expected at all. I spent most of Saturday morning preparing the house the same way I always did before family visits. The routine itself was simple, but routines have a way of steadying the mind. I vacuumed the living room rug, wiped down the kitchen counters, and set out the same blue ceramic plates Daniel and I used for years whenever Ethan came home for dinner. By early afternoon the sun had broken through the clouds, and the house felt warm and quiet again. Around 3 o'clock, I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I looked through the front window and saw Ethan step out first, stretching his arms the way he always did after a long drive. Claire followed a moment later, smoothing the front of her coat before walking toward the porch. When I opened the door, Ethan greeted me with a hug that felt just as genuine as it always had. Claire smiled politely beside him, her expression calm and perfectly composed. If someone had been watching from the sidewalk, they would have seen nothing unusual, just a family visiting on a quiet weekend afternoon. We moved into the living room where sunlight filtered through the curtains, and I offered them iced tea the way I always did. Ethan began telling me about a new project at work while Claire sat beside him, listening with a patient smile. But every few minutes her eyes drifted toward me, studying my face the same way she had across the dinner table earlier that week. She was waiting for something. Waiting for the moment she believed would change everything. I let the conversation continue naturally for nearly an hour. Eventually Ethan stood up and walked into the kitchen to refill his glass. The moment he disappeared around the corner, Claire shifted slightly in her chair and turned toward me. Her voice was soft, but the confidence in it had not changed. "You have been very calm since the other night," she said quietly. I folded my hands in my lap and met her gaze without hurry. "There are many things in life that do not require an immediate reaction," I replied. Claire studied me for a second longer, then gave a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I thought you might want to know the full story," she said. I did not interrupt her. I simply waited. That seemed to encourage her. "I have decided to tell the family tonight," she continued, her tone measured and careful. "It is better when everyone understands the truth." The way she said it made the word truth sound like something she believed she controlled. A few seconds later, Ethan returned with his drink, completely unaware of the quiet exchange that had just taken place. Claire leaned back against the couch again, looking perfectly relaxed. The afternoon moved forward in the same comfortable rhythm it always had. We talked about the weather, about a neighbor who recently sold his house, about a new restaurant opening downtown. Claire laughed at the right moments and nodded politely whenever Ethan spoke. But beneath that calm surface I could see her anticipation growing. She believed the evening would end with a revelation that placed her firmly at the center of the Whitmore family's future. As the sun began to lower behind the trees and the living room filled with the soft golden light of early evening, I rose from my chair and walked toward Daniel's study. Inside the desk drawer rested the same folder I had reviewed 2 days earlier. I placed it carefully on the dining room table before returning to the living room. Claire noticed the movement immediately, though she said nothing. Her eyes followed me with quiet curiosity. In that moment, I realized something with complete certainty. Claire believed tonight would be the moment she revealed her secret. What she did not realize was that the real truth had already been waiting in this house for many years. The evening settled quietly over the house as the last of the sunlight faded beyond the trees behind the yard. Ethan helped me carry the plates to the dining table, completely unaware that the calm atmosphere he felt was about to change. Claire followed a few steps behind him, her expression composed in the same careful way it had been all afternoon. I noticed how her eyes moved quickly toward the dining table when she saw the thin folder resting beside the center candle. She recognized that something had been prepared, even if she did not yet understand what it meant. We all sat down together, the three of us in the same familiar places we had used for years. Ethan began talking about his week again while I served the food. Claire listened politely at first, but I could see her attention drifting toward the moment she had been waiting for. Finally, she set her fork down and folded her hands together on the table. "There is actually something important I should share," she said gently. Ethan looked up with mild surprise. "Is everything all right?" he asked. Claire nodded slowly and turned her eyes toward both of us. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I am pregnant." Ethan's face lit with immediate excitement. The reaction was exactly what any young father might feel hearing that news for the first time. He stood halfway from his chair and laughed in disbelief. "That is incredible," he said, reaching for Claire's hand. Claire allowed the moment to unfold, letting Ethan's happiness fill the room before she spoke again. Then she added the sentence she had been saving since that whisper earlier in the week. "But there is something about this situation that you both should understand," she continued carefully. "The father is connected to this family in a way that may surprise you." Ethan frowned slightly, confused by the strange phrasing. His eyes moved between Claire and me as if searching for an explanation. I remained perfectly calm. After a few seconds, I reached for the folder on the table and slid it gently toward the center where both of them could see it. "Claire," I said quietly, "before this conversation continues, there is something you should read." She hesitated for a moment, then opened the folder with a small flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Ethan leaned closer to look at the pages as well. The room grew very quiet as Claire's eyes moved across the document. At first her expression remained confident, but slowly that confidence faded into something else entirely. Confusion came first, then disbelief. Finally she looked up at me with a stunned silence that told me she understood exactly what she had just read. Ethan looked between us again. "What is this?" he asked. I folded my hands calmly on the table. "It is a condition your father placed in the family estate many years ago," I explained. "Any inheritance connected to the Whitmore name only passes to direct biological descendants verified through legal documentation." Claire said nothing. Her eyes had returned to the page where the language was written in clear, simple terms that left no room for interpretation. The quiet stretched across the room like a long pause in a conversation that had suddenly lost its script. Ethan slowly looked back toward Claire, the excitement from earlier now replaced with uncertainty. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I simply watched the truth settle into the room the way Daniel always believed it would when everything was written clearly enough. After a long moment, Claire closed the folder and placed it carefully back on the table. For the first time since that whisper days earlier, she had no words prepared at all.